Ch.1, which is something that I did not think I would find any evidence of. I must say that when I started researching this topic, I just started looking broadly at any evidence we could find of music, of sound, of anything that was noted that we could grasp firmly. And what I was so surprised about was how much gunpowder played a role and is part of this changing soundscape of the fur trade. And I think this is actually the factor that changed the soundscape more than any other due to the European fur trade was the introduction of gunpowder. So First Nations often first heard fur traders coming, and it was often the sound of gunpowder. These were used as signals from cannons along the coasts or muskets along the rivers. And this was a common signal for attracting attention and trade. And there's First Nations oral history that sometimes captured this dramatic change. For instance, that of Louis Bird, whose Omushkego Cree ancestors first heard the cannon along Hudson Bay and passed this story down for centuries. Small firearms, such as muskets, traveled in advance of fur traders. For instance, the Hudson's Bay Company who traded them to the Cree, and it was the Cree who introduced them to the Blackfoot. So sometimes, you could see that the fur traders' influence extended, in advance of their travel. But it seems quite obvious that firearms, by and large, were quickly adopted by First Nations and widely adopted and incorporated into their own way of life and their own cosmologies. And there was actually such an extensive firearm and gunpowder trade that developed that British gun manufacturers started producing specifically for the Indigenous market by the late 18th century. So a firearm that became known as the Northwest gun, crystallized in the late 18th century and was characterized by its short barrel, which was really good for navigating and maneuvering on horseback or on canoe, its sturdy flintlock mechanism, the smooth bore of the barrel, which was able to fire various projectiles, and an extra large trigger guard to fit a gloved hand. And these guns also had a brass serpent for the side plate. And it's very interesting, this, and I try to discuss how this was may have been understood at the time. There was a custom that became very common, and you see this right from the mid 1700s up until the mid 1800s, of saluting the trading post through gunpowder. And this was commonly called feu de joie. And this was used when ships or canoes were arriving or departing from the trading posts, and they would fire their firearms as a sound-making way to salute with the post, and the trading post would fire arms back. And it was a way that, the arrival and departure could be properly honored. And this custom became so ingrained in the fur trade that Indigenous bands would often send runners in advance to the trading posts for a bit of gunpowder, so that when the full group arrived, they could properly return the salute of the fort and be welcomed properly. And there's evidence that distinctly Indigenous ways of saluting developed, in particular, a staggered salute, where shots were fired successively and irregularly, rather than together as a volley, which was the typical European style, right? They would fire it all at once. But this Indigenous method of a staggered salute became known throughout the fur trade as a kind of an Indigenous method of signaling. And the final thing I want to say about firearms, and it's the last thing I'll say, I must say I didn't think I would, be talking about this topic much when I started this research, but it's an important point to make. And I think that firearms in the hands of First Nations and servants in many ways checked the fur traders' power and control. So on New Year's morning, the servants of the trading posts, and I just should explain, when I use that term, servants of the trading posts or servants of the company, that's really what they referred to as their employees. So we would call them employees, but they were often on 3 or 4 year contracts. And so they're called servants. And at the time, they're called servants of the company, both in the Northwest Company and the Hudson Bay Company. So anyways, the employees of the company or the servants of the company on New Year's morning would actually customarily wake up at dawn and fire their guns outside of the fur trader's window with the expectation that he would wake up, provide them with drinks and food, and they would get the day off and have a dance in the evening. So they didn't ask politely. They used their firearms to wake up the fur trader and demand their holiday. It's remarkable. So, okay, I'm gonna move on now from the discussion of firearms as sound making devices